We're going to move rapidly on, and we're going to hear from, well, perhaps we'll hear a bit later on in the final panel session when we bring back the STB leaders around the table here. We'll hear a little bit more about what was actually discussed. But right now, we're going to focus on our third challenge panel, which is geared around moving goods. Once again, I've got a fantastic group of folk who are going to chew over the issues, and also an excellent expert who's going to set the scene for you. So let me introduce Kevin Richardson to the stage. He's going to really set the scene. Chief Executive for the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. I believe it's maybe a historic moment. This could be one of your final activities in the role.
Could be, yeah.
There you go. Well, you heard it here last, as they say. So, Kevin, set the scene for us. The floor is yours. Moving people.
And before anyone asks, I'm retiring. I know I don't look old enough, but I can assure you I am. And that's the reason I'm going to have to refer to notes, because I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning, so I've got no chance trying to ad-lib. And it's also a shame that actually the audience of the STB leads and the Minister, who I really wanted to address this to, are no longer in the room. But the question about moving goods, the challenges. Well, you might expect me to raise some of the issues that we face around when you put a cycle lane in, how do we deliver brewery kegs across a cycle lane and across a pavement into a Wetherspoons that was originally designed as a bank. You might want me to raise the issue about where is the rail capacity for freight trains and where is the planning for strategic rail freight changes. You might expect me to talk about driver facilities and who do we engage with about ensuring that we've got proper facilities to enable our drivers to be treated as human beings in 2022. You might expect me to talk about vehicle access restrictions and the difficulties those give, and congestion charging zones, and the different approach by the urban mayors to vehicle cab visibility, which means what you might require in Manchester is fundamentally different with what you require in London. But I'm not really going to talk about those, because those are actually minor issues. I will, of course, talk about decarbonisation. But the first thing I want to talk about, and this is a real bête noire of mine, I bloody hate that term, freight. Passenger transport is well understood within government, within the devolved, within the regional and local authorities. But no one really understands about logistics and supply chains. And as someone once said to me at DFT, anything that is not passenger is classified as freight. So as a professional body, one of the nice things we can do is set different definitions. So these are the definitions. Freight, the term used by the public sector to mean anything that isn't passenger, refers to the goods that are carried, whether these are finished products, raw materials, or work in progress. Freight transport relates to the carrying of goods from one place to another by road, rail, air, or sea. Logistics, a term borrowed from the military, means the positioning of resources at the right time, in the right quantity, at the right costs, and in the right quality. Now, all of those are products or derived demands that are in response to the needs to supply chains. And we have heard a couple of references today to freight. I don't think I've heard any reference to supply chains. What's the definition of supply chains? And it excludes the term freight or goods. Supply chains encompass the management of upstream and downstream relationships from source to consumption between suppliers, distributors, and customers to achieve greater customer value added at less cost. Bit wordy, but bear with me. So what are these supply chains? Well, they're complex, interconnected networks, very often and increasingly multinational in their scope and their reach. And as STBs, you might focus on freight movements, you might discuss things with logistics organisations and transport companies within your region. But one of the things you've got to consider is that what originates in the region is most likely to be delivered to other regions and vice versa. Or it could even be another country. And the majority of freight movements are transiting from one STB region to another, or transiting through the multiple ones. So one of the questions is, recognizing the importance for STBs of working together and taking a holistic view and considering supply chains. It's absolutely fundamental in facing the challenges. And at the moment, why do I say those earlier challenges are less important? We're facing a convergence of forces, the likes of which, certainly during my career, I've never seen. We continue to face the challenges of the global impact on COVID. So what does that mean? We've seen ocean freight costs rise from under $2,000 per container to more than $12,000. We've seen massive disruption in manufacturing and imports, even to the point at one time where Felixstowe Port was refusing to load back empty containers, and it's a closed-loop system, all as part of this interconnected network. We still feel the impact of our exit from the EU. So we've got increased costs and lead times, increased costs associated with administration, with customs clearance, and with access, particularly to EU hauliers. We've seen reduced capacity. We've seen operators back out of the UK market in certain sectors. And we've seen issues associated with labour availability, not just associated with drivers, but also particularly in e-commerce warehouses that are very seasonal. The ASOS warehouse at Barnsley that I used to be involved with, we typically ran with 2,500 people per day working within the warehouse. At peak, that went up to 4,500. That was all non-UK EU labour. We still, around Brexit, have the uncertainty over when changes will be implemented. The changes that were due to come in July and October this year have been shifted. To when, we're not sure. We've now got the discussion over the Northern Ireland Protocol, the potential that Article 16 will be invoked, and the further potential that the EU will rip up the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and we're then back to WTO as we are for the rest of the world. But we don't know for sure at the moment. We're having to cope with new working patterns and their impact on consumption. We're seeing the emergence of ESG, and that's impacting investment and insurance decisions. Private equity organisations are now looking at businesses to understand their ESG ratings. And not least, we're seeing an acceleration of changing consumer behaviour. Amazon, since COVID, globally have reportedly taken on 450,000 staff worldwide. Growth in e-commerce across Europe in the last year was around 23%. Now that's substantial, and that really changes the way that supply chains operate and the impact that we have as a profession. COVID has also raised questions about the resilience of supply chains, and organisations, having spent many years implementing lean methodologies and processes, are now moving towards agility. Because we're moving into what's known as the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So we're going to see more disruption. So we've got to look at how supply chains mean. Let me illustrate why considering supply chains in your planning and your thinking is important by looking at the challenge we face in reaching net zero by 2050. I will apologise if I got the term wrong. Decarbonising freight is not in the hands of the logisticians. Decarbonising freight is in the hands of the manufacturers, the retailers, and the distributors. DHL cannot decarbonise a pallet of baked beans. Decarbonising transport will deliver some benefits, but it's the overall approach to supply chains that's key. Because supply chains are the drivers that determine the routes and distances travelled, so where product is sourced from, and the mode that's used to transport it. The packaging that is used, the frequency of the movement, the modes of transport, the number of nodes, so the warehouses, the customs clearance points, the consolidation centres, deconsolidation centres. And it's the combined effect of changes in technology, process, and networks that coming together will enable these to deliver net zero. Now, what sort of changes are we likely to see? Well, we spent the 1980s building big warehouses in the Midlands. Why did we build the Midlands? Why did we go for the Golden Triangle? Because if you ran a centre of gravity for UK population, it was Crick. So we disbanded all our regional warehouses, built these whopping great distribution centres in the middle of the UK. The parcel hubs are now located there, so it's great for e-commerce. Is it going to look like that in 20, 30 years? Probably not. What will we move to? Probably back to regional distribution centres and micro hubs and consolidation centres for urban areas. So when you're looking at your planning, think about the long term and think about consumer behaviour. One of the things I've suggested to DFT and the government is consider legislating on consumer behaviour. Why can someone order product from multiple retailers and receive multiple deliveries every day of the week, wherever they are? Why do we not say for a certain rural region that's difficult to get to, you can only have your deliveries on a Tuesday afternoon? Because that would make things much more effective. Now, clearly the government don't want to do that, but talking about behavioural change, if you look at supply chains, we run on a very systematic, planned basis. What we respond to is consumer demand ultimately. That's the bit that can be impacted by behavioural change. The other problem we've got as a profession is, where do we engage? Because quite frankly, DFT don't get it. You can engage with DFT as we did in the early stages after the Brexit vote, and we said, we're here to help you. And they said, great, let's talk about road transport, but we want to split out palletised movements from parcels. So we said, what about supply chain? What's that? And we were the ones that coined the term frictionless borders and the importance of keeping this global network fluidly moving and seamlessly moving. Do we engage with the STBs? Well, it would be nice to, but do we want to engage in isolation? Because our discussions with the STBs are predominantly around things like, how do we get investment into our region? Or I had a great discussion with at some stage, several years back, when platooning was very much the vogue, from the Midlands Connect, talking about platooning. We want to talk about platooning. And I said, great, what happens when it goes into the next region? Why are you not joined up in terms of your thinking? And I'll give you another illustration of how this works within government. At the moment, we're talking about the Border 2025 strategy. And the UK, with sovereignty, because we've left the EU, are saying, we want the most effective border in the world. And we've said, waste of time, because if it's not interoperable with borders on the other side, it is not a seamless border. And as STBs, one of the things you've got to consider is not to look at things in isolation. There are things that are relevant to you that are localized. But when you're considering supply chains, and I'll revert back to that term, moving goods, bear in mind that they're multinational. And it's only by working together and working together with the organizations like ourselves, like CILT, like some of the trade associations, and with the operators, that we're really going to begin to deliver change. The other thing to recognize is that it's not one size fits all. So decarbonizing transport in an urban environment is likely to be electric, e-cargo bike, micro hubs, movement in by rail with intermodal containers, consolidation centres. Rural is fundamentally different. Now, the urban mayors are tackling problems associated with the urban areas. The issues associated with rural are pretty well known. The majority of ton kilometres for freight transport take place on the trunking legs. So this is between the nodes, so from one warehouse to another, or warehouse to retail or manufacturing. And tackling that particular problem, it's not going to be addressed by electric unless we go overhead catenary or under road charging, or battery technology fundamentally changes. Because sticking a 10-ton battery in a truck, which is the sort of thing that Tesla are proposing, truck looks fantastic, but you lose payload, so suddenly you need 2 trucks. And where are you going to charge them, and what's the infrastructure going to look like? So trying to find the solutions to those actually requires substantial joined-up thinking. So my request to the audience, and particularly to the subnational transport bodies, you actually have a key role in helping us address these challenges and enabling the opportunities, but it needs to be done collectively. Don't do it in isolation, and don't do it in competition. Because if government departments don't provide the means for joined-up thinking, and local authorities don't understand the challenges, and there is no minister for supply chains, and if it's critical infrastructure, why haven't we got one? Then you're the go-to collective group, I think, to help us address and build the supply chains that add value to the economy and society. Thank you very much.
Kevin, interesting point you make about moving away from the phrase freight towards supply chains. It was put to me the other day that even supply chains is slightly restricted. It should be supply systems because they are all encompassing. I mean, do you agree? Is moving towards a supply system is a better way to think about how do you actually integrate all the elements of?
I think it's a question of two things. One is considering whose supply chain it is. Tesco's supply chain typically goes from you, the consumer, assuming you shop at Tesco and other supermarkets are available, but then through to, for example, McCain's and the bread suppliers and whatever. That's their supply chain. What COVID showed was a lack of understanding of the extended supply chain, which is where we're really missing. And so that's, Tesco's suppliers to their suppliers and beyond. People refer to it as sort of field to plate type approach, but it's that whole, taking the whole thing. And the other thing to bear in mind, of course, is, McCain's as a frozen food supplier to Tesco are just one of their customers, so their supply chain looks fundamentally different.
Yeah, we also saw the link between fertiliser and CO2 and frozen food, etc.
Yeah.
The other thing which you didn't mention is, and maybe worth reflecting on, what do you see as the impact of free ports? Big government strategy around creating 8 UK free ports.
We're big supporters. We were actually proposing this at a very early stage after the Brexit vote. There is a real opportunity for the UK to generate growth by using the free ports in the way that places like Jebel Ali, for example, in the Middle East are doing. And the opportunity is to try and take movements into Europe away from Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg, into the UK. At the moment, a lot of UK product is actually delivered into mainland Europe and then short sea crossed or brought through the Dover crossings back into the UK. If we could reverse that, that would be fantastic.
That's great because we're going to hear from East Midlands Airport a bit later on, so that's a good segue into that. Kevin, come and join us on the panel. Thank you very much, Kevin. Round of applause.